The billionaire's wife hadn't smiled in 3 years. Then, at a five-star Dubai restaurant, he turned to a young Persian waitress and made a demand that stunned the entire room. What happened next would crack open a world of hidden grief, ancient poetry, and an offer that would rewrite every rule of wealth and loyalty. Her name was Layla, a 26-year-old Persian immigrant who had spent 6 months working double shifts at one of Dubai's most exclusive restaurants, sending nearly every cent back to her ailing mother in Tehran. She was invisible to the wealth that surrounded her until the night a desperate billionaire looked past her uniform and saw something he'd been searching the world for, someone who spoke his wife's language of pain. What he demanded next would reveal a secret grief that no amount of money could heal, and set in motion a chain of events no one at that dinner table could have predicted. Layla's life was measured in tips left on crisp white tablecloths and the hours between shifts when exhaustion blurred into prayer. Her mother back in Iran was battling a kidney disease that required dialysis twice a week, treatment the family could not afford without the money Layla wired home every Friday. Her father had died 5 years earlier in a construction accident just outside Esfahan, leaving behind medical debts and a small apartment that smelled of rose water and grief. So Layla came to Dubai, like thousands before her, chasing the promise of a better wage and the hope that a foreign city could stitch her family back together. She had a degree in Persian literature from the University of Tehran, but degrees do not always translate across borders. She found work at Mirza's, an opulent restaurant perched on the 38th floor of a waterfront tower, where a single tasting menu cost more than her mother's monthly medications. She told herself the work was temporary. 6 months had already passed, and each shift felt longer than the last. The restaurant was a cathedral of wealth. Gold leaf adorned the ceilings. Hand-blown chandeliers from Murano cast light so soft it seemed to forgive every excess. Patrons arrived in Bentleys and Rolls-Royces, women dripping in diamonds, men whose wristwatches could fund a small hospital. Layla moved among them like a shadow, noting their preferences, refilling water glasses, clearing plates without a sound. She heard fragments of their conversations, mergers worth billions, vacations on private islands, divorces that dissolved fortunes. None of it was meant for her ears. But she listened anyway, because listening was free, and it reminded her that the world contained more than the four walls of her shared flat and the constant anxiety over her mother's next hospital bill. But there was one table that silenced the room when they arrived. Table 7, the corner alcove with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Arabian Gulf. It was permanently reserved for Sheikh Karim Al Fayed, the Emirati energy magnate whose name appeared alongside sovereign wealth funds and construction empires that stretched from London to Kuala Lumpur. He was in his late 50s, broad-shouldered and deliberate in every movement, his presence more understated than the gold-sheathed younger men who followed him like courtiers. His suits were custom, his quietness a kind of armor. Everyone at Mirza's knew who he was. Very few understood the weight he carried. His wife arrived separately. Soria Al Fayed was Persian by birth, a woman who had been a renowned architect in Tehran before marriage and exile. In old photographs, she radiated a fierce intelligence, her dark eyes scanning blueprints with the kind of focus that won international competitions. But the woman who stepped out of the black Maybach and walked through the gilded doors of Mirza's had become a ghost of that brilliance. Her abaya was immaculate, her posture perfect, but her face was absent. She moved as if the air had turned to water. She rarely spoke, and when she did, it was in Arabic, the language of her husband's world, not the Persian that still lived in her dreams. What had happened to Soria Al Fayed was a wound the family never publicly acknowledged. Over a decade ago, during a visit to her hometown of Shiraz, her younger brother Reza had been arrested by Iranian authorities on charges the international community condemned as fabricated. Despite Karim's immense wealth and legal pressure, Reza died in custody before any appeal could reach him. Soria never recovered. She carried guilt like a second spine. She blamed herself for not doing more, for leaving Iran, for building a life of luxury while her brother suffocated alone in a cell. The grief settled into her bones until she no longer recognized the woman in the mirror. She stopped designing. She stopped smiling. She stopped speaking in the language that reminded her of everything she had lost. Karim had tried everything. He hired the finest therapists from Geneva, specialists in trauma who flew in on private jets. He commissioned installations of Persian gardens in their Dubai estate, filled with jasmine and pomegranate trees that mimicked her childhood home. He bought her an entire library of first-edition Persian poetry, Rumi, Hafez, Farrokhzad, volumes she never opened. He even arranged for a private concert by a master santoor player, hoping the music might stir something the doctors could not reach. Nothing worked. Her silence became a monument to the brother she could not save. And yet, Karim kept bringing her to Mirza's. It was her grandmother's favorite dish from childhood, a saffron-braised lamb with dried limes that the chef replicated imperfectly but with enough devotion to memory that Soria sometimes took a few bites. It was one of the few things she still did. The waitstaff knew not to hover, not to make eye contact unless addressed. The couple's visits were quiet, suffused with a sadness the staff learned to navigate like a reef. On this night, the first Thursday of November, Layla was assigned as the primary server for table 7 for the first time. The regular server had called in sick, and the floor manager, a nervous man named Youssef, decided that Layla's discretion and quiet demeanor made her the safest choice. She was terrified. She had served sheikhs before, but never Al-Fayed, the billionaire who could end a career with a look. Karim and Soria arrived at 7:30 exactly. The ritual was familiar. He pulled out her chair, she settled without a word, her gaze fixed somewhere beyond the window. He ordered for both of them, his Arabic fluid and gentle. Layla approached with the customary greeting in English, unsure of what else to use. Karim nodded without meeting her eyes. Soria did not react at all. Layla retreated to the service station, her heart pounding. She stole a glance back at the table. Karim was holding his wife's hand, his thumb tracing circles over her knuckles, speaking softly in Arabic about a new hospital wing the foundation was funding. Soria sat unmoved, a statue carved from grief. And then Layla heard it, a fragment of something Karim said, 2 words in particular that he whispered as if they hurt him. Riza Jan, Riza dear one. He had said her brother's name. That was the moment Layla understood why the woman never spoke. She had lost not just a person, but a language. And as Layla understood this, her own past rose up. The poetry her grandmother had sung while kneading dough, the lullabies her mother hummed in the dark, the verses of Hafez they recited around the radio during blackouts. Persian was the home she had been forced to leave, just as it was for Soria, only she had buried it so she could serve in silence. 2 hours passed. The main course plates were cleared. Karim kept trying to draw his wife into conversation, his voice increasingly strained. He asked about her day through the private nurse, whether the garden jasmine had bloomed, whether she had heard from their daughter in Geneva. Nothing. The dessert menu arrived, a silver tray of tiny rosewater macarons and cardamom ice cream. Soria turned her face away. Karim's composure cracked. It was barely perceptible, just a tightening in his jaw, a slight tremor in his right hand as he set down his fork. Layla, standing near the service column, felt the shift in the air. She saw a billionaire, a man who could move markets with a phone call, reduced to helplessness by the silence of the woman he loved. His wealth meant nothing. His power meant nothing. Grief was the undefeated champion. And then, without warning, Karim swiveled in his chair. His eyes found Layla, and she felt pinned to the marble floor. His voice was not loud, but it cut through the ambient hum of the dining room with the force of a command that had built empires and evicted rivals. You, he pointed at her. His next 4 words escaped his lips before he could measure their weight, and yet he spoke them as if they were the most important demand of his entire life. Speak to my wife in Persian. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Layla felt every eye in the restaurant turn toward her. 100 diners suspended mid-bite. The clinking of silverware ceased. Even the pianist's fingers froze above the keys. A billionaire had just commanded a waitress to speak to his wife in a language the entire room suddenly realized was forbidden in this palace of Arabic and English. She could feel her pulse in her temples. Her first instinct was to apologize and retreat, to pretend she had not heard correctly. but then she looked at Soria. The woman's head had lifted, just slightly, like a flower sensing rain for the first time in a drought. Something ancient and desperate flickered behind those vacant eyes. Layla understood in that moment that this was not a request. It was a last resort. So she stepped forward. Her hands, which had carried thousands of plates without trembling, were now unsteady. She stopped 2 feet from the table, the expanse of white linen between them like a gulf. Her Persian, the language she had been hiding behind polite English and service smiles, rose from a place she had almost forgotten. It was her grandmother's voice that came out, measured and warm. Salam Khanum, Hali Shoma Kub, hello dear lady, are you well? It was a simple phrase, the kind exchanged between neighbors on a village morning. But to Soria Al-Fayed, it was the unlocking of a door that had been rusted shut for over a decade. Her eyes widened. Her lips parted, but no sound came. Layla felt the silence stretch unbearably. Karim's jaw was clenched so tight the veins in his temples stood out. She could hear the sharp intake of his breath, a billionaire holding onto the edge of a crumbling cliff. Layla searched her memory for something more. She had left Iran with a single suitcase, but inside it, she carried an entire library of verse her mother had insisted she pack. A worn collection of poems by Hafez, Rumi, and the modern voice of Farah Farrokhzad. Her grandmother had taught her that poetry was the soul of Iran, that when you could not speak your own pain, the poets had already done it for you 7 centuries ago. She took a quiet breath and let the words come. Chojan da Bajuraft, as to Kabahayi. When life grew heavy, you brought news of another world. It was a line from Hafez her grandmother used to recite while crushing saffron threads. The words were soft, almost too quiet for anyone beyond the table to hear. But Soria heard. Her eyes, glassy and distant a moment before, suddenly glistened. A tear escaped the corner of her left eye and traced a slow path down her cheekbone, disappearing into the black fabric of her hijab. It was the first crack in a wall built from grief and guilt. Karim let out a sound that was half sob, half prayer. He did not move. He did not speak. He simply watched his wife with the intensity of a man who had spent years trying every key on a massive ring and was finally hearing the lock begin to turn. The restaurant manager appeared at Layla's shoulder, a nervous twitch in his mustache, whispering that perhaps she should return to her duties. Karim silenced him with a single raised finger, a gesture that communicated more authority than any volume ever could. No one was going to interrupt. Layla knelt beside the table, an action that broke every protocol of formal service but felt entirely necessary. She was no longer a waitress. She was a bridge between 2 exiles. She spoke about her own mother, who cried herself to sleep for 6 months after Layla left Tehran. She described the small apartment filled with rose water and the photograph of her father that hung above the television. She recited a lullaby her mother used to hum during electricity blackouts, a melody so old its origins had dissolved into myth. Soria's hand, resting on the table like marble sculpture, began to tremble, and then Soria spoke. It was a single word, carried on a breath that seemed to cost her everything. Riza, her brother's name. The name Karim had whispered moments before, the name that represented an unhealed wound that had festered into silence. Layla felt the weight of it. She did not know the details of what happened to Riza, but she knew the shape of loss. She had lost a country, a father, the daily presence of her mother. She reached across the table and gently placed her hand near Soria's, not quite touching, but close enough to offer warmth. What happened next silenced even the most indifferent of the wealthy patrons. Soria began to weep openly, not the elegant tears of a woman maintaining decorum, but the raw, shuddering sobs of someone surfacing after years underwater. Karim rushed to her side, kneeling on the marble floor in his handmade suit, clutching her shoulders. He looked at Layla with an expression she could not fully read, gratitude, astonishment, and something more, something that resembled the desperation of a man who realized he had just been handed the only tool that could save the woman he loved. But then Soria's body went rigid. Her breathing became ragged, her eyes rolled back, and she slumped forward against her husband. Chaos erupted. The bodyguards surged forward. Someone screamed for a doctor. Karim shouted in Arabic, a flurry of commands Layla could not follow. Within seconds, Soria was lifted, and carried through a service exit to a private elevator that led to a medical suite on a lower floor, a facility that existed precisely for emergencies involving the establishment's elite clientele. Layla stood frozen, her heart pounding. The room buzzed with speculation. She had done what was asked, and now the woman had collapsed. A wave of guilt washed over her. Had she pushed too hard? Had her words unlocked something too painful to bear? She turned to leave, to disappear into the anonymity from which she had been summoned, but a large hand clamped gently on her shoulder. It was one of Karam's security men. "Mr. Alfade requests that you wait. Please do not leave." His tone made it clear this was not optional. 20 minutes passed. Layla sat in a small anteroom normally used for private business meetings, staring at a Persian carpet that reminded her of home. She thought about her mother's dialysis appointment tomorrow, about the money she was supposed to wire. She thought about the half-finished poetry collection she had been writing in secret, a manuscript tucked under her mattress, the only evidence left of the scholar she had hoped to become. She thought about Soria's eyes when she said her brother's name. It was not just grief she had seen, it was guilt. A guilt so profound it had become a life sentence. The door opened and Karim entered alone. He looked 10 years older than he had an hour ago. His tie was loosened, his eyes red-rimmed. He sat down heavily across from Layla and for a long moment simply looked at her. When he finally spoke, his voice was hoarse. "My wife has a condition. The doctors have a long name for it, but I will give you the truth. She has been dying by inches for 11 years. She stopped designing. Then she stopped eating properly. Then she stopped speaking first Persian, then Arabic, then any language at all. Her body has been surviving, but her spirit has been extinguishing itself like a candle with no air. Tonight, for the first time since her brother's funeral, she spoke in her mother tongue. You did that." Layla shook her head. "I only recited some verses. Anyone could have done it." "No," Karim's voice hardened. "Anyone did not. I have hired the finest therapists on 3 continents. I have flown poets into Dubai to read for her. I have played recordings of her grandmother's voice. Nothing worked, because none of those people were you, a young woman who carries her own exile in her chest, a woman who served our dinner but also speaks the language of Hafez like it belongs to her." He leaned forward. "I am going to ask you something, and I want you to understand that I am not a man who asks. I am a man who acquires, but this is not a negotiation. This is a plea." Layla's throat tightened. She knew before he said the words that her life was about to be altered beyond recognition. "I want you to come to our home, spend time with Soria, speak Persian to her, read her poetry, remind her that the country she lost still lives in words. I will compensate you more than any waitressing job ever could. I will ensure your mother receives the best medical care available in Tehran or here if you wish. I will arrange everything, but I need your answer now. Because tonight, the doctors told me that if something does not change, she may not survive another winter." The offer hung before her like a door swinging open onto an unknown landscape. She thought of her mother, of the life she had been struggling to stitch together thread by thread. She thought of the poems under her mattress, the dreams she had buried under the weight of survival. She thought of Soria's tear and the sound of her brother's name spoken like a resurrection. And she thought about what it meant to be asked by a billionaire to do the one thing she had always done in secret, bring her language back to life. But she also thought about what it would cost. Entering their world meant leaving behind whatever fragile control she had over her own existence. It meant trusting a man whose power was absolute, whose gratitude could turn to expectation, whose wife's fragile recovery might collapse under the burden of her own haunted memory. Was she ready to be the thread that held another woman's life together? She met Karim's eyes. "I need 24 hours. I cannot give you an answer tonight." Karim studied her, and for the first time she saw something other than desperation in his gaze. It was respect. He had offered to change her life with a snap of his fingers, and she had not immediately said yes. That meant she was the right person. A woman who could not be bought would be the only one who could truly help his wife. "Very well," he said quietly. "But remember, Layla Jan, time is the one thing my money cannot buy, and it is the one thing she may not have." He rose and left the room, and Layla sat alone with the weight of a decision that would reshape everything she had ever imagined for herself. Outside the window, the lights of Dubai glittered like promises. Inside her chest, her grandmother's voice whispered a line from a poem she suddenly remembered. The wound is the place where the light enters you. She did not yet know whether she would step into that light or turn away and remain in the dark of her own carefully constructed invisibility. And somewhere in a private medical suite, Soria Al-Fayed opened her eyes and asked for the waitress who had spoken to her in Persian. It was the first complete sentence she had uttered in over 3 years. Layla did not sleep that night. She lay on her narrow bed in the shared flat, staring at the ceiling fan as it wobbled through its endless circles, her phone clutched in her hand like a lifeline. At 3 in the morning, it rang. The caller ID made her heart stop. It was the hospital in Tehran. Her mother had suffered a sudden kidney failure episode and was in intensive care. The doctor's voice was clinical but urgent. They needed to start a new treatment regimen immediately, one that cost more in a week than Layla earned in 6 months. Without it, the prognosis was measured in weeks, not years. The cruel arithmetic of survival presented itself with brutal clarity. She had not yet given Karim her answer, and the universe had just made the decision for her. She called the number on the card the security man had pressed into her palm. It was answered on the first ring. Within an hour, a black sedan arrived outside her building to take her to the Al-Fayed estate. The estate was a sprawling compound on the edge of the desert, hidden behind walls clad in flowering jasmine. Layla was escorted through courtyards where fountains whispered and peacocks wandered across manicured lawns. She was led to a private wing where Soria rested in a sunlit room filled with medical equipment masked by silk drapes. Karim was there, his face etched with exhaustion, but when he saw Layla, something like hope flickered in his eyes. Before she could speak, he raised a hand. "Your mother is already being transferred. A private medical flight will bring her to Dubai tomorrow. She will have access to the finest nephrologists in the region." He paused, reading her shock. "I took the liberty. I hope you will forgive me. I could not allow you to be distracted by a problem I can solve." The gesture was staggering in its generosity and terrifying in its assumptions. Karim had crossed a boundary without asking, and yet the result was exactly what she needed. She felt a mixture of gratitude and unease that would define much of what followed. "Why are you doing all this?" she asked quietly. He turned toward his wife's sleeping form. "Because she asked for you, not my name, not her daughter, not a doctor. She asked for the waitress who spoke Persian. That is the first time in 11 years she has reached for anyone. I will move mountains to keep that reaching alive." He looked back at Layla. "But there is something I need to tell you, something I have never told anyone, and you must hear it before you decide." They walked through the gardens as the sun rose over the desert, the air cool and heavy with the scent of jasmine. Karim spoke with the measured cadence of a man narrating a wound. 11 years ago, Soria's brother Reza had been arrested in Shiraz on espionage charges. The arrest was orchestrated not by the Iranian government, but by a business rival of Karim's who knew that targeting Soria's family would destabilize him. The rival had contacts within the Revolutionary Guard. Reza's imprisonment was a message. Karim had paid ransoms, called in favors from every government that owed him, but the rival's reach was deeper than he anticipated. Before a rescue could be arranged, Reza was dead, and then Karim delivered the line that reframed everything. "Soria does not know it was orchestrated. She believes it was a random tragedy of political persecution, that her brother was simply in the wrong place. If she ever learned that his death was a weapon aimed at me, it would not merely break her. It would annihilate the last fragments of who she is. She would see her entire marriage as the cause of his murder." His voice broke. "I have kept this secret from my wife for 11 years to protect her sanity." Layla stopped walking. The weight of what she had just been told pressed against her chest. She was being invited into a house built on a secret that could destroy its foundation. Her role was to heal, but the healing would coexist with a lie. "Why are you telling me this?" she whispered. "Because you are the first person she has let in. She will tell you things. She will share memories of Reza. And one day she may ask questions that lead to the truth. I need to know that you will protect her from that truth, even if it means lying to her face." Karim's eyes were desperate. "I am asking you to do what I have done for over a decade, carry a secret to save a life." It was an impossible request. Layla had been raised on her grandmother's insistence that truth was the only fertile ground for healing. Yet here was a man who had watched his wife wither and had chosen silence as mercy. She could not judge him, she could not agree either. She bought time with a careful answer. I will help Soria. I will speak Persian with her, read her poetry, be whatever companion she needs. But I will not make promises about secrets I just learned. If she asks, I will not volunteer what you have told me, but I will not build her recovery on a lie. Karim accepted this with a grave nod. It was the best he would get. He then revealed the second purpose of their meeting, the one that made this not just a personal arrangement, but a life-altering transformation. He was launching a cultural foundation in Soria's name. The Soria Al-Fayed Foundation for Persian Heritage would fund language programs, art exhibitions, and scholarships for Iranian refugees and exiles around the world. It would reclaim the culture grief had stolen from his wife, and he wanted Layla to be its director. This is not charity, he emphasized. You have a degree in Persian literature. You know the poetry, the history, the soul of the language. My wife will be the figurehead, but you will be the architect. You will design programs, curate events, and travel to diaspora communities. Your salary will ensure your mother never lacks for care again, and you will have a permanent residence in Dubai, fully sponsored. The offer was everything. It was the life she had abandoned when she left Tehran, back in her hands, wrapped in gold. She looked toward the house where Soria lay, a woman she had met only hours ago, a woman whose first word in years had been her brother's name. And she thought about the secret locked inside her husband's chest. The whole enterprise was built on tectonic plates that could shift at any moment. Yet the alternative was to walk away, to return to the restaurant, to watch her mother die slowly from lack of treatment, to bury her poems under mattress and her gifts under exhaustion. She gave her answer as the sun fully rose, gilding the desert in pale gold. I accept, but the foundation must also support families like mine, not just cultural heritage. It must help people who are still struggling, not only those who have already achieved. And one more thing. When the time is right, I want to help Soria write her own story. Her brother's memory deserves truth, even if it comes slowly. Karim hesitated on that last point, then inclined his head. Within a week, Layla's world had been upended. Her mother arrived in Dubai, frail but alive, installed in a private room with windows overlooking the sea. Layla was given an apartment in the estate's guest wing. Her belongings moved from the cramped flat by staff who packed even her hidden poetry manuscript with careful reverence. She began spending afternoons with Soria, who remained fragile but whose eyes now followed Layla with a hunger that was both healing and terrifying. They started with simple conversations about food, about the smell of jasmine, about the way Persian tea must be brewed with exactly the right amount of bergamot. Soria's sentences were halting, often dissolving into silence, but each day she spoke a few more words, as if her vocal cords were relearning their purpose. But the world beyond the estate was not so serene. When the news leaked that a waitress had been elevated to direct a billionaire's foundation, the reaction was swift. Tabloids ran headlines suggesting an affair, a gold-digging scheme, a Cinderella story with suspiciously convenient timing. Business rivals of Karim whispered that the foundation was a tax shelter, that Layla was a pawn. Within the family, tensions surfaced. Karim's nephew, a sharp-suited MBA named Tariq, who had expected to manage the foundation himself, viewed Layla as a usurper. He began a quiet campaign to undermine her, questioning her credentials, leaking unflattering details to journalists. Then the moment came that shattered the fragile peace. It happened on a Thursday afternoon, as Layla and Soria sat in the library reading the poetry of Farah Farrokhzad. Soria had been asking about Layla's grandmother, about the healing techniques and the poems. She began to speak of her own grandmother, and then without warning she said, "Riza used to read these verses to me. He had a beautiful voice. He was going to be a teacher." Her voice was steady, but her eyes were far away. "Layla, do you believe in fate? That some things are meant to happen, even terrible things?" Layla felt the ground shift beneath her. The secret Karim had revealed was not hers to share, but the question pierced straight to it. She chose her words with care. "I believe terrible things happen because people make them happen, but I also believe the dead want the living to be free. Your brother loved you. He would want you to be free." Soria was quiet for a long moment, and then she said something that froze the air. Sometimes I dream that Reza did not die by accident, that someone sent him to that prison because of who we are, because of the wealth, the power, and in my dream I know who it is, but when I wake, the face disappears. Layla could barely breathe. Was Soria closer to the truth than anyone realized? She did not answer. She simply took Soria's hand and held it, and in that silence, the Foundation's first tremor registered. She knew then that the secret could not be contained forever, and that when the truth emerged, it would either destroy everything she was building or finally set Soria free. The question was which one, and the answer was rushing toward them faster than anyone could prepare for. The days that followed were a tightrope walk over an abyss. Layla continued her afternoon sessions with Soria, each conversation a careful dance around the dark shape at the center of the room. The Foundation's launch preparations accelerated, and Layla found herself juggling architectural plans for a cultural center, a curriculum for Persian language workshops, and the fragile emotional architecture of Soria's recovery. Her mother, meanwhile, responded miraculously to the new treatment. Layla began to believe that the universe had, for once, decided to cooperate. But Tariq, Karim's nephew, was not interested in cooperation. He had expected to inherit control of the family's philanthropic arm, and Layla's sudden elevation felt like a personal insult. He began attending board meetings with a ledger of her supposed inadequacies. He hired a private investigator to dig into her past, hoping to find something that might embarrass his uncle. What he found instead was the one secret Karim had spent 11 years burying. The investigator traced the old business rival, a man named Seed Mirzai, who had since fallen into disgrace and fled to a non-extradition haven in Central Asia. Tariq obtained documents and bank records that proved Seed had paid a Revolutionary Guard official to arrest Reza Al-Fayed on fabricated charges. And he found a single, devastating memo addressed to Seed from a middleman that read, "The target's brother-in-law will be moved to Ward D once the transfer is complete. The Al-Fayed patriarch will be sufficiently distracted to renegotiate the oil contracts." Tariq had stumbled upon the smoking gun. He did not go to Karim. He went to Soria. It was a Tuesday afternoon when Soria's private nurse found her holding a manila envelope, her face drained of all color. Nurse called Karim, who was in a board meeting in the city. By the time he arrived, Soria had locked herself in her room and refused to come out. Layla was already there, standing in the hall, her heart a hammer. Through the door, she could hear Soria's sobs, but these were not the silent tears of a woman drowning in grief. These were screams, punctuated by questions shouted in Persian. "You lied to me for 11 years. You let me believe it was fate. You let me carry this guilt alone." Karim beat his fist against the door, his composure shattered. He turned to Layla with wild, desperate eyes. "She knows. Everything is ruined. I should have told her years ago. I was a coward." He slid down the wall until he was sitting on the marble floor, a billionaire reduced to rubble. Layla knelt beside him. "No, this is not the end. It is the beginning of the truth. And the truth, however painful, is the only soil where real healing grows. That is what my grandmother taught me. You have been holding a wound closed with lies, and it has poisoned her for 11 years. Now the wound can finally drain." She knocked softly on the door and spoke in Persian. "Soria Jan, it's Layla. I know you are angry. I know you are devastated. But I am here, and I am not leaving. You do not have to face this alone. Open the door not for him, but for yourself. For Reza, he would not want you to be trapped in this house of secrets." The door opened slowly. Soria stood there, her eyes swollen, her abaya askew, her voice raw. Did you know this when you came into my home and recited Hafez like a sister?" Layla did not look away. "I knew there was a secret. Karim told me part of it on the day I accepted this work. He asked me to keep it from you, and I told him I would not build your recovery on a lie. But I did not know the details. I did not know Tariq would weaponize this. And I am sorry I could not protect you from the shock." She reached out and took Soria's hands. "But I know something else now, something you might not believe yet. The secret kept you sick. The truth, however terrible, is the path to your freedom. You have been punishing yourself for a crime that was committed against your family, not by it." Soria stared at her for a long moment, and then her gaze shifted to Karim, who remained on the floor, weeping. "You did this," she whispered. "Your enemies took my brother. You built this palace on his bones, and I loved you through all of it, not knowing that you were the reason he was in that cell." Karim did not defend himself. He simply nodded, his voice a rasp. "Yes, everything you say is true. I have no excuse. I only have remorse and a love that has been burning me from the inside for 11 years. I was afraid that losing you would mean losing the last reason I had to live, so I lied. And it nearly killed you anyway." The silence that followed felt like the world holding its breath. Then Soria did something unexpected. She walked to her husband, looked down at him, and extended her hand. "Get up. I do not forgive you yet. I do not know if I ever will, but I will not let Reza's death be the end of me. Layla is right. I have been sick with secrets not my own. Now I want to heal, and if you want to be part of that, you will stop hiding. You will tell the world what happened. You will help me build this foundation on truth, not charity." Karim looked up at her with the expression of a man who had been handed back his life. "Anything, I will do anything." In the weeks that followed, the Al-Fayed estate became a crucible of transformation. Karim publicly disclosed the story of Seed Mirzai's conspiracy and his own complicity through silence. The revelation shattered his reputation among some circles, but it also opened a new chapter. Soria began to speak not only Persian, but Arabic and English again, her voice gaining strength with each passing day. She started sketching architectural plans for the first time in over a decade, her fingers rediscovering the language of design that grief had stolen. And she asked Layla to become not just the foundation director, but her personal language partner, her daily companion in reclaiming the culture she had lost. The Soria Al-Fayed Foundation for Persian Heritage launched 6 months later in a ceremony held in the newly restored garden courtyard of the estate. The event was attended by scholars, exiled artists, refugee children who had never seen a Persian library, and diplomats from around the world. Soria stood at the podium and spoke for 20 minutes without notes, her voice steady, her message clear. "My brother Reza believed that language is the home no one can take from you. For years, I let that home become a prison of grief. Today, we open the doors. Every child who has lost a country will find a library here. Every woman who has been silenced will find her voice. This is not my foundation, it is his." Layla watched from the side of the stage, tears streaming down her face. Her mother, now fully recovered and seated in the front row, clutched a handkerchief and beamed. Karim stood beside Soria, his arm around her waist, a man whose vulnerability had finally made him whole. But the final surprise was yet to come. After the ceremony, Soria pulled Layla into a private room. "You came to this country with a suitcase and a book of Hafez. You worked double shifts and sent every coin home. You are the reason I am standing here. And so, I am giving you what no one can take away." She handed Layla a large leather-bound folder. Inside were the deeds and architectural plans for a permanent campus in Shiraz, the city of poets, the city where Reza had dreamed of teaching. The campus would house the Foundation's international headquarters, and Layla's name was emblazoned as founding director, with a lifetime appointment and a budget larger than most university endowments. "With this," Soria said, "you will never have to serve anyone again. You will only have to serve the words that saved me. And one more thing." She handed Layla a smaller envelope. Inside was a letter of sponsorship for her mother's full citizenship and a deed to a modest but beautiful home with a garden of jasmine on the outskirts of Tehran, so that her mother could return home whenever she wished, with dignity. "You gave me back my voice," Soria said. "This is only the beginning of what I can give you." The circle was complete. The waitress who had been commanded to speak Persian in a restaurant had become the guardian of an entire language's future. The billionaire's secret had surfaced, and instead of destroying everyone, had forged a stronger foundation built on truth. And the wife who had been dying of guilt had discovered that the cure was not forgetting the past, but reclaiming it. Layla looked at the documents in her hands, at the poet's name on the letterhead, and she heard her grandmother's voice once more, reciting the verse that had started it all. "Chojan da bar juraft as to Kabahayi. When life grew heavy, you brought news of another world." She had been that news for Soria, and now Soria was that news for her. As the sun set over the Dubai skyline, Layla walked out into the courtyard where the guests mingled, the scent of jasmine thick in the air. She no longer felt invisible. She was a bridge, a guardian, a woman who had turned a billionaire's desperate demand into a legacy that would outlast empires. And somewhere she knew Rizal was smiling. The story of Layla and Soria is not merely about a billionaire's demand or a waitress's courage. It is about the invisible threads that bind us across class, across borders, across the unspoken grief that no amount of money can silence. A language, when stripped of its homeland, becomes a ghost. And ghosts, as anyone who has left a country knows, can haunt with exquisite tenderness or devastating silence. Soria had been haunted into silence, and Layla, without knowing it, had been carrying the exorcism in her breath all along. Consider the improbable sequence: a piece of lamb stuck in a throat, a grandmother's healing hands in a Yemeni village, a businessman's desperate plea in a Manhattan ballroom. These are not separate stories. They are the same story, repeated across generations, asking us to recognize that heroism wears no uniform and that wisdom does not require a degree. In the original transcript, we saw Fatima save a life with ancient knowledge. In the new story, Layla saves a life with ancient poetry. Both women were invisible until a moment of crisis demanded they speak. Both transformed their worlds not with wealth or status, but with the one thing no one could buy: the gift of their heritage. What is the Persian word for home? It is the same word for poem, shir, and that is perhaps the deepest truth of all. When we are far from everything familiar, the language we carry is the only architecture we truly own. For 11 years, Soria had been homeless in that most intimate sense, a woman cut off from the words that shaped her soul. Layla gave her back the keys to that home, and in doing so, built a mansion for others. But the story also forces us to confront uncomfortable questions. How many of us are carrying secrets that we believe protect the ones we love, when in fact they are slowly burying them? Karim's lie was a prison built with the best intentions, and it nearly became a tomb. The truth, when it finally arrived, was brutal. But brutality can be a kind of mercy when the alternative is a slow death of the spirit. There are Sorias in every city, in every family, silenced by wounds they did not create but cannot escape. The question this story leaves us is, who will be their Layla? Who will speak the forbidden language that unlocks the door? Perhaps it will be you. Perhaps you already know the words someone near you needs to hear. Perhaps you, like Layla, have been hiding your most valuable gift because you thought it was too ordinary, too small, too foreign for the world to value. This story is proof that the ordinary, offered at the right moment, can become the hinge upon which a life turns. We began with a demand: speak to my wife in Persian. We end with a foundation that will echo across continents for generations. That is the arc of this narrative, and it is not finished. The Soria Al-Fayed Foundation will open its doors, and children who have never seen a Persian garden will learn the poetry of Hafez. They will build their own homes in words. And Layla will continue to be a bridge, just as her grandmother was before her, because that is what healers do. Before we part, there is something I want you to consider. This story exists because someone chose to write it down and because you chose to watch it. Stories are the oxygen of connection. If this one moved you, do not let it end here. Share it with someone who needs to hear that their voice matters. Like this video so others can find it. Subscribe to this channel so we can continue bringing you stories that remind you of the extraordinary hidden in the ordinary. And in the comments, tell us about a moment when a single sentence changed everything for you. We read every story. We believe in the power of your voice too. You can buy many things in this world. You can buy private jets and penthouses and the silence of those who owe you favors. But you cannot buy the right words spoken at the right time. You cannot buy the courage to kneel beside a stranger and offer the language of her lost home. You cannot buy the kind of love that builds a foundation on the ruins of a secret and makes it stronger than any palace built on gold. Those things are earned only through pain and poetry and the terrifying act of showing up. And somewhere, as the jasmine blooms in a courtyard in Shiraz, a brother is still smiling, because his death was not the end, because his sister is speaking again. Because a waitress from Tehran remembered that words are the only bridges that fire cannot burn. Go be that bridge. The world is full of people waiting for someone to speak their mother tongue.